In America, where the promise of freedom collides with the reality of authority, a single misstep can unravel unchecked power, especially when it's wielded without restraint. Picture yourself in Charlotte, North Carolina, on a humid late July afternoon in 2025, as Officer Ryan Caldwell, a 38-year-old cop, sits in his patrol car, unaware that in just a few minutes, his ordinary day will spiral into a story that leaves you wondering, what happens next? We'd love to know where you're following this tale from, which country, what time. Register, or drop a comment to dive in with us. The day began like any other in the sticky heat of the Queen City. Traffic hummed along Independence Boulevard, the skyline shimmered in the haze, and the AC in Ryan's cruiser struggled to keep up. He leaned back in his seat, one hand on the wheel, the other cradling a half-empty iced coffee from Dunkin', condensation dripping onto his uniform pants. His shift was straightforward. Watch the roads, issue a few tickets, and if he caught a break, maybe grab a biscuit from Bojangles. His mind was already drifting to the weekend. Perhaps he'd catch a Panthers game or head to Lake Norman with off-friends. With 12 years on the force, he knew the weight of the badge but hadn't yet lost his edge. Charlotte is a city of contrasts. Old Southern charm meets new money, tree-lined suburbs giving way to urban sprawl. Ryan liked that. It kept things interesting. He'd grown up here, knew the streets like the back of his hand, and took pride in keeping them in order. The radio crackled with routine chatter. A fender bender on I-85, a shoplifter at South Park Mall, but nothing demanding his attention. He adjusted his sunglasses, scanning the flow of cars ahead. Then he spotted it. A silver 2018 Toyota Camry, easing through an intersection just as the light flipped from yellow to red. To Ryan, it was a beat too late. Instinct kicked in, his fingers flicked the switch for the lights, the siren let out a sharp yelp, and he watched the Camry pull over to the shoulder near a strip mall with a Harris Teeter and a vape shop. The driver didn't speed off, didn't swerve, just stopped, eerily calm. That rubbed Ryan the wrong way. Most people at least looked nervous when the lights came on. He took a final sip of his coffee, set it in the cup holder, and stepped out into the thick Carolina heat. The air smelled of asphalt and exhaust with a faint hint of azaleas blooming in a nearby median. Ryan squared his shoulders, feeling the familiar heft of his duty belt. Handcuffs, radio, Glock, all the tools of the trade. This was his turf, his stretch of road, and he'd handled stops like this 1,000 times. A quick ticket, maybe a warning if the driver played nice, and he'd be back in the cruiser before the ice in his coffee melted. But as he approached the Camry, a flicker of unease crept in. The driver's window was already down, and the man behind the wheel wasn't what Ryan expected. This wasn't a jittery teenager or a flustered mom late for pickup. This guy, he was different. The man in the car was Marcus Evans, a black man in his late 50s, with close-cropped salt-and-pepper hair and a face that carried a rare, quiet confidence. He wore a polo shirt, the kind you'd find at Kohl's, nothing flashy but pressed and neat, as if he cared about how he presented himself. His hands rested on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, his posture straight, almost military. Ryan took it all in within a second, his cop brain assessing the situation. He'd seen every type out here, speeders, drunks, people with warrants, but Marcus didn't fit any of those molds. That put Ryan on edge. "License and registration," Ryan said, keeping his tone clipped and professional. He rested one hand on the Camry's roof, the metal scorching under his palm, and peered inside. No fast food wrappers, no clutter, just a clean interior with a faint scent of leather cleaner. Marcus didn't move right away. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, meeting Ryan's eyes through the aviators. "Can I ask why you pulled me over, officer?" His voice was steady, not loud, not soft, just clear, like he was asking about the weather. Ryan's jaw tightened a fraction. He hated that question. Hated when people didn't just comply, when they acted like they had a say in how this played out. "You ran a red light," Ryan replied, nodding toward the intersection 100 yards back. Marcus raised an eyebrow, just enough to notice, and glanced at his side mirror as if double-checking. "I'm pretty sure that light was yellow when I went through," he said, his tone still even, no edge to it. Ryan felt a prickle at the back of his neck. His cruiser didn't have a dash cam. Budget cuts had left half the department's cars without them. But that didn't matter. Out here, his word was law. License and registration, he repeated, slower this time, letting the authority sink in. Marcus nodded once as if he'd anticipated it, and reached for the glove box with deliberate care. No sudden moves, no rush. He pulled out a slim folder, slid his license from his wallet, and handed both over. Ryan took the documents, scanning the name. Marcus Evans. It didn't ring any bells. No outstanding warrants came to mind from the morning briefing, but something about how Marcus moved, smooth, controlled, like he'd been through this before, set Ryan's nerves on edge. Most people fumbled, stammered, or at least looked anxious when a cop loomed over them. Not this guy. He just sat there, hands back on the wheel, watching Ryan with those steady eyes. It wasn't defiance, not exactly. It was something else, something Ryan couldn't pin down. "Everything check out?" Marcus asked, casual as if chatting with a neighbor over a fence. Ryan's grip on the license tightened. He didn't like that tone, didn't like the calm. It felt like a challenge, even if it wasn't meant to be. The air on Independence Boulevard was a furnace, the kind of sticky Carolina heat that clung to your skin and made every breath feel like a negotiation. Officer Ryan Caldwell, 38, stood by the silver 2018 Toyota Camry, his patrol car's lights flashing lazily behind him. Sweat beaded under his collar, his iced coffee long forgotten in the cruiser's cup holder. He'd just pulled over Marcus Evans, a black man in his late 50s, for easing through an intersection a beat too late. A red light, Ryan insisted, though Marcus had calmly countered, "I'm pretty sure it was yellow." That calm, that unshakable steadiness in Marcus's voice was a splinter under Ryan's skin. Most drivers fumbled or flinched when the sirens came on. Not this guy. His hands rested at 10 and 2, his posture straight, his eyes meeting Ryan's through aviator sunglasses with a clarity that felt like a challenge. "License and registration," Ryan repeated, his tone sharper now, the authority in his voice a shield he'd polished over 12 years on the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. Marcus didn't rush, didn't fidget, just reached for the glove box with deliberate care, pulling out a slim folder and sliding his license from a worn leather wallet. Ryan took the documents, scanning the name. Marcus Evans, born 1967, address in a modest corner of East Charlotte near Mint Hill. Nothing about it screamed trouble, no priors from the morning briefing, no red flags, but trouble wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, like the way Marcus sat there, unflinching, like he owned the moment. "Everything check out?" Marcus asked, his voice smooth, almost conversational, as if they were neighbors swapping small talk over a fence. Ryan's grip on the license tightened, the plastic creaking faintly. He didn't like that tone. Didn't like how it made him feel like he was the one being sized up. "You ran a red light," he said, nodding toward the intersection 100 yards back, where cars still flowed under the haze of a late July afternoon. Marcus raised an eyebrow, barely noticeable, and glanced at his side mirror. "Pretty sure that light was yellow when I went through," he said again. No edge, no defiance, just fact, like he was correcting a typo. Ryan's jaw clenched. He didn't need a debate out here on the shoulder of Independence Boulevard, with strip malls sprawling in every direction and the faint scent of azaleas mixing with asphalt and exhaust. His cruiser lacked a dash cam. Budget cuts had gutted half the department's tech, but that didn't matter. Out here, his word was the law. "I don't care what you think the light was," he said, his voice dropping low, the kind he'd used to shut down rowdy drunks back when he worked nights. "License checks out, but we're not done here." Marcus tilted his head, catching Ryan's eye again. "If it checks out, why are we still talking?" he asked, still calm, still precise. Ryan's pulse ticked up. That was twice now, twice this guy had questioned him. Charlotte was a city of contrasts, old southern roots tangled with new money ambition, tree-lined suburbs giving way to urban sprawl, and Ryan prided himself on keeping its streets in order. He'd grown up here, knew every shortcut from No Day to Ballantine, and he wasn't about to let some civilian play lawyer on his turf. "Step out of the car," Ryan said, the words slicing through the hum of passing traffic. Marcus's brow furrowed, just a touch. "Why's that?" he asked, his voice steady as ever. Ryan's hand drifted to his duty belt, thumb brushing the edge of his cuffs. "Because I'm telling you to," he snapped, stepping back from the Camry's window. The heat pressed down. A pickup truck with a faded bumper sticker slowed to gawk, then sped off. Ryan didn't flinch. He'd dealt with rubberneckers before, but Marcus's stillness was starting to burrow into him. Most folks would have been sweating by now, stammering apologies or excuses. Not Marcus. He just sat there, hands on the wheel, like he was waiting for Ryan to reconsider. Marcus exhaled slowly, a deliberate sound that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 such moments. "I'm not trying to make this hard," he said, "but I'd like to know what I'm stepping out for." Ryan's grip on the license tightened again, his knuckles whitening. "You're stepping out because I've got reasonable suspicion," he said, leaning on a phrase from the academy he hadn't thought about in years. "You're questioning me, delaying me, that's enough." It wasn't airtight, and Ryan knew it, but out here, with no backup rolling up and no camera to second-guess him, it didn't have to be. Marcus nodded once as if he'd expected this and reached for the door handle. "All right," he said, his voice flat, and pushed the door open. Ryan braced himself, his body tensing as Marcus stepped out, unfolding with an ease that belied his age. At 5'10", Marcus wasn't imposing, but there was a solidity to him. Shoulders square, movements precise, like he'd spent years drilling the same steps. His polo shirt, pressed and neat, stretched slightly across his chest, hinting at muscle that hadn't softened with time. His black sneakers were scuffed but clean, like they'd seen real use. Ryan gestured to the back of the car. "Hands on the trunk," he said, keeping his tone steady, though his heart was thudding now. Marcus complied, walking to the rear of the Camry and placing his palms flat on the silver paint, fingers splayed. But as Ryan stepped up to pat him down, Marcus spoke, low and under his breath. "This isn't necessary." Ryan froze, one hand hovering near Marcus's shoulder. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice sharp enough to cut through the roar of a passing motorcycle. Marcus turned his head slightly, just enough to meet Ryan's eyes over his shoulder. "You've got my ID. You've got my plates. You know I'm not carrying anything." His tone was matter-of-fact, like he was stating the weather forecast. Ryan's blood simmered. "You don't get to decide what's necessary," he said, and started the pat-down, hands moving quick and firm down Marcus's sides. No weapons, no bulges, just a wallet in the back pocket and a set of keys clipped to a belt loop. Clean, like Marcus had said, but that didn't ease the knot in Ryan's gut. It tightened it. "Turn around," he said, stepping back and reaching for his cuffs. Marcus stiffened, his hands still on the trunk. "For what?" he asked. And this time there was a slight edge to his voice, not fear, not anger, but something harder, like steel beneath velvet. Ryan's fingers closed around the cuffs, the metal cool against his sweaty palm. "I said, turn around," he repeated. Louder, the command echoing off the concrete barrier lining the boulevard. Marcus didn't move. The air went still, the distant hum of traffic fading into a tense silence. Ryan's mind raced. He could feel the situation slipping, the control he'd always relied on fraying at the edges. This wasn't a punk kid or a strung-out driver. This was someone who knew how to stand his ground, and that made Ryan's next move a gamble. Without thinking, he grabbed Marcus's arm, yanking it back to snap the cuffs on. The move was fast, instinctive, but Marcus's reaction was faster. He didn't pull away, didn't swing. He just shifted, a subtle twist of his wrist that made Ryan's grip slip for a split second. It wasn't resistance, not yet, but it was enough to make Ryan's breath catch. This guy knew how to move, knew how to counter, and suddenly Ryan wasn't sure who he was dealing with. "Don't make this worse," he barked, his hand tightening on Marcus's arm, the cuffs dangling. Marcus looked back at him, eyes steady as ever, and said, I'm not the one making it worse. That was the moment Ryan knew he'd crossed a line. The Charlotte sun beat down, turning the standoff into a pressure cooker. Ryan's hand stayed locked around Marcus's arm, the cuffs glinting in the afternoon light. He yanked harder, forcing Marcus back against the Camry's trunk, the silver paint scorching under his palms. Marcus didn't resist, didn't wince, just let Ryan move him, his body tense but controlled. Ryan fumbled with the cuffs, the click of metal loud as he snapped them onto Marcus's wrists. "You're under arrest," he said, the words spilling out fast like he needed to justify it to himself. Marcus's head tilted slightly. "For what?" he asked, his voice still maddeningly calm. Ryan's mind scrambled. Resisting? Obstruction? He hadn't thought it through. "Failure to comply," he spat, settling on something vague enough to stick. Marcus let out a slow breath, almost a sigh, and shook his head, not in panic, but in something closer to resignation. That lit a fire in Ryan's chest. He wasn't about to be judged by some guy he'd pulled over on a Tuesday afternoon. "Get in," he growled, shoving Marcus toward the cruiser with more force than necessary, opening the back door. Marcus moved without a fight, sliding into the seat with that same precision Ryan had noticed earlier. Shoulders square, no slouch, like he was stepping into a courtroom, not a squad car. Ryan slammed the door, the sound echoing off the median, and leaned against the cruiser, catching his breath. Through the wire partition, Marcus's eyes met his in the rearview mirror, unshakable. "You sure about this, officer?" Marcus asked, his tone flat but heavy, like he already knew the answer. Ryan's jaw tightened. "Keep quiet," he muttered, climbing into the driver's seat. But deep down, a sliver of doubt was clawing its way in. Ryan gripped the wheel, merging back into traffic, the Camry left on the shoulder like a discarded prop. The radio crackled with routine chatter, a fender bender on I-77, a domestic call in Dilworth, but Ryan barely heard it. His mind was a tangle of adrenaline and unease. Marcus sat silently in the back, staring out the window as gas stations and fast food joints blurred past, his calm a silent accusation. Ryan told himself this was fine. Just another arrest, just another day. But the weight of Marcus's composure, the way he'd handled every move like it was rehearsed, gnawed at him. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Ryan had always seen himself as one of the good ones, a cop who showed up, did the job, kept the streets safe. Growing up in Charlotte's suburbs, he'd idolized the badge, the way it commanded respect. His father, a mechanic who'd worked himself raw at a garage off Tryon Street, had drilled into him the value of order. People need rules, Ryan, or it's chaos. That belief had carried him through the academy, through late-night shifts breaking up fights at bars on Central Avenue, through the grind of traffic stops and paperwork. But lately, the job felt heavier. Budget cuts, public protests, the constant drumbeat of defund on X, it chipped away at him. He wasn't naive. He knew some cops crossed lines. But him? He was just doing what the badge demanded. Yet Marcus's calm was a mirror, reflecting something Ryan didn't want to see. He'd felt it the moment Marcus questioned him, those steady eyes, that even tone. It wasn't defiance, not exactly, but it was close enough to make Ryan's hackles rise. He'd dealt with plenty of drivers who mouthed off, but they always cracked, sweating, stuttering, or speeding away. Marcus didn't. He just sat there, like he'd seen this script before and knew how it ended. That scared Ryan, though he'd never admit it. Fear wasn't part of the uniform. As he pulled into the precinct lot, the reality of what he'd done settled in. No dash cam, no clear charge. Just a gut call that had spiraled. He radioed dispatch, voice clipped. "This is Caldwell. Got a suspect in custody, heading to the station." The response was quick. 10-4. What's the charge? Ryan's thumb hovered over the mic, his throat tight. "Obstruction," he said finally, the word tasting like ash. He cut the engine and sat for a moment staring at the precinct's brick facade. Marcus hadn't spoken since that last question. "You sure about this, officer?" But his silence was louder than any protest. Marcus sat in the cruiser's back seat, the cuffs biting into his wrists, though he didn't let it show. At 58, he'd learned to keep pain, physical or otherwise, at arm's length. 25 years in the Marine Corps had taught him that. Through desert heat in Iraq, through sleepless nights training recruits at Paris Island, through the quiet battles of coming home to a world that didn't always know what to do with a black veteran. He'd retired a lieutenant colonel, a title earned through sweat and sacrifice. But out here on Independence Boulevard, none of that mattered. To Ryan, he was just a driver who'd dared to ask why. Marcus wasn't naive. He'd grown up in Charlotte when it was still a sleepy southern town, before the skyscrapers and tech money reshaped it. He'd felt the sting of suspicion long before he ever wore a uniform. Store clerks trailing him, neighbors clutching purses when he walked by. The Marines had given him structure, a place where discipline could outweigh prejudice. But civilian life was messier. He'd faced stops like this before. Cops who saw his skin before his service, who heard his calm as a challenge. He'd learned to move carefully, to keep his hands visible, to speak softly but firmly. It wasn't about fear. It was about survival. As Ryan shoved him into the cruiser, Marcus had felt the old instincts kick in, the ones that kept him steady under fire, that taught him to read an opponent's next move. Ryan was young, wired, leaning too hard on the badge to prop up his ego. Marcus saw it in the way his hands shook slightly, in the way his voice cracked when he barked orders. The kid was scared, not of Marcus, but of losing control. Marcus could have resisted, could have made it harder, but he didn't. Not because he was afraid, but because he knew the game. Out here, with no witnesses, no cameras, escalation only hurt him. So he complied. Let Ryan play his part, all while filing away every detail. The officer's name, the badge number, the exact sequence of events. Marcus hadn't fought for freedom overseas to let it slip away on a Charlotte roadside. At the station, Ryan slumped at his desk, scrolling X on his phone while Marcus was processed in holding. The precinct buzzed, phones ringing, a drunk yelling in the lobby, the AC wheezing like it was on its last legs. Ryan smirked at a post about Hornets tickets, trying to shake the unease from the stop. He'd done his job, followed protocol, mostly. No big deal. Then a voice cut through the chaos. "Caldwell, my office now!" It was Sergeant Mike Torres, a grizzled vet with a buzz cut and a scowl etched into his face, standing in his doorway with a phone pressed to his ear. Ryan's stomach dropped. He pushed through the glass door, the air in Torres's office thick with tension. Torres didn't sit, didn't offer a chair, just glared, slamming the phone down. "You want to tell me why I've got a retired Marine Corps lieutenant colonel in our holding cell?" Ryan blinked, his mouth dry. What?" Torres leaned forward, knuckles white on the desk. "Marcus Evans, 25 years in the Marines, served in Iraq, trained recruits at Paris Island, got commendations thicker than your file." Ryan's mind reeled. Those steady hands, that posture, it clicked, but too late. Torres kept going, voice low and furious. "You just cuffed a man who's forgotten more about discipline than you'll ever learn, all because he didn't bow down on the side of the road." Ryan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "I didn't know," he started, but Torres cut him off. "No, you didn't, because you didn't check. You saw a black guy who didn't jump when you snapped, and you lost it." Torres jabbed a finger toward the squad room window. Ryan turned, his gut twisting. Officers were huddled, whispering. The front desk was swarmed with suits, crisp ties, clipped strides, maybe feds. Phones were lighting up like a concert crowd. "I've got brass from Camp Lejeune on the line, asking why one of their own is in a Charlotte cell," Torres said. "You have any idea what you've stepped in?" Ryan's hands balled into fists, sweat beading on his neck. "He wouldn't comply, Sarge. He questioned me." Torres barked a laugh, bitter and cold. "He knew his rights, and you couldn't handle it." He grabbed a file and shoved it into Ryan's chest. "Internal review starts now. Every stop you've made, every ticket, we're looking at it all." Ryan clutched the file, his throat tight. "This is bullshit," he muttered, but Torres's eyes were ice. "Get out," he said. Within days, Ryan's world unraveled. A bystander's phone video of the arrest, shaky but clear, hit X, racking up millions of views. WSOC-TV looped it. The Charlotte Observer splashed it across their front page. Local cop cuffs decorated Marine veteran over traffic stop. Comments flooded in. Another power-tripping badge. This hero deserves justice. Internal Affairs dug into Ryan's 12-year record, finding a pattern. Too many stops of black drivers, too few citations for white ones. Suspended without pay, he holed up in his Ballantine apartment, staring at a muted TV. The department offered a deal: resign or face charges. He signed, and his badge was gone. No pension, no farewell, just a name tied to a scandal. Marcus walked free, his composure unbroken. His one phone call had unleashed a wave. Military brass, civil rights groups, the mayor's office. New policies hit the precinct. Body cam audits, bias training. At a press conference outside the county courthouse, Marcus spoke, his voice steady. "I didn't want an apology. I wanted accountability. I served this country for 25 years, fought for freedom, not to be treated like a suspect in my own city." The crowd roared, helicopters buzzing overhead. For Marcus, it wasn't about revenge. It was about ensuring the next guy didn't face the same. Ryan, scrolling X from his couch, saw the headlines stack up. The lesson was brutal. Power without accountability was a house of cards. He'd thought the badge made him untouchable, a Charlotte cop above the fray. He was wrong. Marcus's stand had exposed the cracks in the system Ryan had leaned on. For Charlotte and America, it was a reminder. Unchecked authority only lasts until someone fights back. Months later, Ryan sat in a dive bar off South Boulevard, nursing a beer he couldn't afford. The scandal had cost him more than his job, friends ghosted, his landlord raised the rent, and his father, now retired, wouldn't take his calls. "You shamed us," his dad had said, voice heavy with disappointment. Ryan stared into the amber liquid, replaying the stop. He hadn't meant to escalate, hadn't meant to cuff Marcus, but that calm, that refusal to bend, it had felt like a personal affront, like Marcus was stripping away the one thing Ryan had left: control. He thought about Marcus's life, 25 years in the Marines, facing real stakes, real enemies. Ryan had never served, never left Charlotte except for a spring break in Myrtle Beach. The badge had been his war, his way of proving he was more than a mechanic's kid from the suburbs. But Marcus had shown him how small that war was. Ryan didn't hate him, not really. He envied him, envied the way Marcus carried himself, the way he'd turned a roadside stop into a reckoning. Ryan wanted that strength, but all he had was regret. Marcus, meanwhile, didn't revel in the spotlight. He returned to his routine, mowing his lawn in Mint Hill, coaching a youth basketball team at the local rec center. But his arrest had sparked something bigger. Community groups rallied, demanding oversight boards. The city council passed a transparency ordinance. Marcus spoke at forums, not as a victim, but as a soldier still fighting, this time for a city that lived up to its promise. "Freedom isn't free," he'd say, echoing his Marine days. "Not overseas, not here." He thought about Ryan sometimes, wondering what drove a man to snap like that. Not malice, Marcus figured, but fear. Fear of being seen as weak, of losing the only power he had. Marcus didn't forgive easily, but he understood. He'd seen it in recruits, in enemies, in himself. The difference was Marcus had learned to master it. Ryan hadn't. Charlotte simmered in the aftermath, its contrasts laid bare. Old money versus new dreams, trust versus suspicion. Ryan's fall and Marcus's stand became a flashpoint, debated in barbershops and boardrooms. Some saw Ryan as a scapegoat, a cop caught in a no-win job. Others saw Marcus as a hero, proof that one voice could shift the tide. The truth, as always, was messier. Power, unchecked, bred fragility. Accountability, demanded, bred strength. For every Ryan, there was a Marcus waiting to remind the system of its limits,